Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you, Tim, Jason, Ollie, for setting this up. And I'd say I'm really excited to be here tonight talking to you. This is a place I've spent many an hour over the course of my lifetime. This is my football club. I spent a lot of time here growing up. And to be able to be here tonight talking about sports and autism is a real pleasure for me. Just to tell you a little bit about my professional background. I obviously grew up here, went to school here. I went to work for the National Autistic Society for 7 years. I worked within the employment service of the National Autistic Society. So a lot of my time, up till I came back to develop Autism Guernsey, was spent with adults, almost all of whom had Asperger's syndrome. So that was looking at employment, working with individuals who were in mainstream employment, working with businesses. I then came back about 2 years ago now to set up Autism Guernsey. I was just telling Linda before, actually, we've just taken on some bank staff now, so we've actually got 12 staff in total, which is amazing, really. And we run a number of services. We run a befriending service for adults, that's joint with MenCap. We run an independent living service where we get young adults moving out of the family home into their own homes. We run an outreach service where we go and work with individuals and families, and through that we have a youth club we're just setting up. We have an interest group for adults, like a social group. And we also do some work in some of the schools, Elizabeth College, with some of the pupils there. And I'm just getting started the business training consultancy service where we work with businesses and employ staff on the Autism Spectrum. I have got a little bit of information here about Autism Guernsey, but I'm going to park that there now and get onto the sport stuff, because obviously you're all here to talk about sport, and it's great to see people from so many different backgrounds, really, from the different sports, working with people of different ages and different abilities. And you know, I'm not the expert in here by a long way. You know, you all come to this with your own experiences of coaching at whatever level that is. Whether you've been coaching for a long time, whether you coach full time, whether that's something you're very new to. I really encourage you throughout the evening to apply what you would do with your own coaching style and just adapt it to the stuff I'm talking about tonight. Because ultimately, you know, you'll have your own coaching style. And working with someone with autism, it's just another person who's going to be you're going to be working with. So we've got 3 aims for tonight. So the 3 aims for tonight are to increase your understanding of autism spectrum conditions. Secondly, to increase your confidence when working with people on the autism spectrum. And thirdly, to offer a range of practical strategies. Now, I am conscious of time. This is going to be quite a fast-paced session. We've also got Mike Hutting, who's a Paralympic coach, who's going to Skype in at 7:30. So fingers crossed the technology works on that one. Now, I always start my sessions with this quote here. And if we just take a moment to have a read through this quote, I think this, for me, sets the scene pretty well. Now, for individuals who I work with day in, day out, individuals on the autism spectrum, that last bit there, the weirdest, most puzzling tribe of all, is right here on our doorstep. And I think that's a pretty apt description for a lot of people I work with. Because life is quite puzzling. And if you think about even down to messages that we give in day-to-day life, it's very rare that we actually say exactly what we mean. And it's very rare that we're very literal in our communication. And that can be really confusing for people on the autism spectrum. So, I could cite many, many examples, but maybe something like, we've got a bar here at the back. Now, when you go to the bar there, you're going to be applying the context of a bar that you've been in anywhere. Now, at a bar, you don't queue up one behind the other. Whereas if you go to maybe Co-op across the road and you're at the till, you're going to queue up one behind the other there. Now, no one ever teaches us that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff we're supposed to be able to just pick up naturally. Equally, I do a lot of training sessions, and we set the chairs out before the session, and almost always people will come and sit where the chairs are. No one, for example, came and sat on this chair here. Now, again, we never told you that, but that's applying the social context to a setting. And that's the kind of stuff which, for a lot of people I work with, that can be quite difficult. What are autism spectrum conditions? Autism spectrum conditions are lifelong developmental conditions. Effectively, it affects the way the brain develops and works. Okay? I don't think of it as a negative thing. For me personally, I really like the term diffability, different abilities. And as we'll see today as we go through this session, that when you use the individual's strengths, just like any athlete that you're working with, you can find real talents there, real abilities there. But so often in life, unfortunately in my view, so often in life people I work with get pulled down, get told off for doing things which actually are quite normal to that individual and are not bothering anyone else. So we're talking about lifelong development conditions. We don't know the causes of autism. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of speculation, shall we say. But the two key areas that we believe play a part are environmental factors and genetic factors. And I could talk at length about research and things, but I won't do that this evening. What we do know is that individuals will be affected in three key areas. So we're talking about difficulties around social communication, around social interaction, and around social imagination. So those are the three key areas that anyone across the autism spectrum will likely have differences in, shall we say. And we know that autism as a condition affects around 1% of the population, so about around 1 in 100. So people often ask me how many people in Guernsey are on the autism spectrum, and there are no statistics, we simply don't know, but we can assume that there are around 600 people because that's the stat that's used in most of the Western world. So we've been no different in Guernsey. And we also know that 4 males are diagnosed for every 1 female. So in your coaching, you're likely to see more males than females on the autism spectrum. But again, obviously that depends on the context in which you're coaching. You know, you may be coaching a female team, you may be coaching a male team, you may be coaching a mixed sex team. I coach up here, I coach minis up here, and I know we've got very few females within the mini section anyway. So, you know, in my coaching with my under 8s, it's more likely obviously I'd be working with males. Now this next diagram, I really like this as quite a simple way to describe this autism spectrum. I don't like to get bogged down in technical details, in terminology, because ultimately I think that takes us away from the individual that we will be working with. So I like this as a simple illustration of this broad autism spectrum. So on the left hand side there, we've got Asperger's syndrome. On the right hand side, we've got classic autism. It's a condition which affects people in hugely different ways. From individuals who would need very high levels of care and support throughout their life, through to individuals who need relatively little or no specialist support, and anything in between. So I think, you know, if you're working with someone who has a diagnosis, who tells you they're on the autism spectrum, you know, that's going to tell you very little. You need to know the individual and what works for the individual and what doesn't work for the individual. And in doing that, you're going to have to be working with the individual. You're going to have to be learning from those people around the individual who know them very well. That way you'll get to know what works for that person or what doesn't. So I've talked through the 3 key areas there, the social communication, the social interaction, and the social imagination. But there are some related issues which are relevant. So sensory sensitivities is a common issue with people on the autism spectrum. So if you think about even in a room like this, the fan, I'm not sure what, it's probably the fridge actually, I would say. Can anyone hear the fridge there? Now, literally until I started that sentence, I hadn't heard that fridge. I was listening, I was trying to find something that I could listen out for. Now I've heard that fridge, I'm pretty darn sure that in about 30 seconds I literally won't be able to hear that fridge again. because my sensory processing abilities will just filter out that noise. It will go into my subconscious and I won't be conscious of it. For a lot of people on the autism spectrum, that filtering process can be a lot more difficult. So that's why you might see someone, with hands over their ears, or shying away from light and avoiding sensory input. That's why you also may see someone who's more of a flapper and is seeking sensory input. So the relevance of that, obviously, in a coaching context, I'll come on to later, because I've got the strategies that I'll work through. But be aware that sensory inputs, and that could be touch, that could be noise, that could be light, that may have a heightened effect on that individual. The other issue is context blindness. Now, context blindness is a term that Peter Vermeulen, a researcher in Belgium, has coined. And essentially what we're talking about there is the context of any given situation may be difficult for someone on the autism spectrum. Someone might not understand the context and might need a greater explanation of the context. So, unsurprisingly, St Martin's Football Club is very similar to a lot of sports clubs. It has the paraphernalia, it's got some trophies at the back, not as many as we'd like, but we've got the pictures and the records there. We've got the big room, we've got the bar, we've got changing rooms through there, the office through there, the toilets. So even before you came into this room tonight, you probably had a reasonable expectation of what you would walk into. Okay? Someone on the autism spectrum may not have applied that going to Sylvans or going to Velrec or going to the hockey club to coming to this room tonight. Therefore, when that person walks in this room tonight, there may have been a lot of new stuff there which that person may need to process. So when we're talking about context, it's really important that in your coaching situations, that individual on the autism spectrum is understanding the context of that exercise, why you're asking that person to do a certain drill, and how that then relates to the game. Because if that person doesn't understand it, it'll make it quite difficult for that person to engage in that activity. Heightened anxieties are very, very common. I think the world is actually quite a scary place for a lot of people I work with, sadly, in a lot of instances, because the world changes. We talked about the sensory, talked about the difficulties with social communication, etc. Therefore, it's quite common for an individual who's coming into your coaching session on the autism spectrum to already have a heightened level of anxiety. So you may have to work harder to reduce those anxiety levels before actually that individual will be able to engage in the activity there. And in the coaching strategies, we can go through a couple of examples of how to do that. Dietary issues are quite common. Issues with motor coordination. Now, that's one which can be quite relevant. That quite a lot of people on the autism spectrum will have difficulties with motor coordination, and that's where actually playing sport can improve the motor coordination in a lot of cases. But it's something to be aware of, and that person may have to work harder to learn that skill, to develop that skill. It may take longer. It's a developmental condition. But that person, there's no reason why that person can't necessarily get there if it's the right task for that person. Max?
That's my question.
Yeah. Good. Must have thought ahead for it. Epilepsy is more common in the autistic population, as is conditions like OCD, ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, I really enjoyed preparing for this session because I do a lot of sessions which are quite similar, whereas today I've got a really different audience, and it was fantastic. So I did a lot of research in terms of preparing for this, and I tried to find if there's much research, and I mean academic research, in autism and sport, and there's hardly anything. I could come across hardly anything. Where I found the most academic research, there's a few papers on martial arts, karate. Now, whether that indicates that martial arts or karate are best for people on the autism spectrum, I'm not so sure. Generally, in research terms, once one paper gets done, that then will lead to other papers. But like I say, there's a real lack of proper research into autism and sport. But from the research findings from the papers that I did find, it showed things like decreases in stereotypic behaviour, increased group play, and increased ability to work within the group, improvements in speech, improved attention. I mean, anecdotally, I think individual sports are going to be more popular than team sports for people on the autism spectrum. I think if we were able to go through and work out where these individuals are, because there will be people, I'm pretty sure within most of your clubs you will have people on the autism spectrum, whether that person's diagnosed or not. I would expect to see more within individual sports. Team sports are much more social. You know, on a team sport, it might be something as seemingly simple as that end of season tour, which stops the person actually wanting to get involved at the start because they're worried about going on tour because they don't know them, they don't know the people, they might be rooming with someone, there might be all sorts of social barriers there to getting involved with team sports. Like I said, that's not to say that team sports will not have people on the autism spectrum, but like I said, I would expect to see, anecdotally, more people in individual sports. Also, for some people, that concept of the winning and losing can actually be a really difficult concept. There's quite a lot of people I know who have real issues with concepts like that, and therefore may choose sports which are not about winning and losing, but maybe sports which are about taking part, or sports where there's an individual goal. So, you know, long distance running, for example, you know, I may set my PB as I want to do a marathon in 3.5 hours, 4 hours, you know, and if you go to something like the London Marathon, there's people with all sorts of personal goals, but it's a mass participation and it's there for everyone. There's very few disclosed elite athletes I can find. I've, you know, done a bit of research and I can't find many disclosed athletes elite athletes at all. But I would hazard a guess that there are any number of elite athletes who are on the autism spectrum. So it's a pure guess, it's speculation, but I would say so. Then I looked through all the sports in Guernsey, and you'll probably find it difficult to read this, but great website there, Sports Commission, and there's, Ollie, you could probably tell me how many sports on the list?
49.
49 sports. So, you know, we may need to think a bit creatively with sports in terms of what sports would work best for that individual on the autism spectrum there. And I know when I was at school, you know, I went to Elizabeth College, and, you know, kind of football and cricket and hockey were the main sports, and that's where a lot of the focus was. But actually, is Rob Harnish here tonight? I don't know. I've not actually met Rob, but I know Rob was on the list. Rob does fencing at college, and that is going great guns by all accounts. I work with some people who attend his sessions, and I know there's you know, a sport like fencing, which when I was at college was not a popular sport. It's a really popular sport now. So, you know, there's loads of sports going on, plenty of choice. I then thought about sporting rituals, and if you read this quote from Rafa Nadal, I found it a really interesting quote. I don't know if everyone might not be able to see that, but this is a quote from Rafa Nadal about his preparation for a game and how he approaches his game of tennis. I then put 2 bottles down at my feet, in front of my chair to my left, one neatly behind the other, diagonally aimed at the court. Some call it superstition, but it's not. If it were superstition, why would I keep doing the same thing over and over again, whether I win or lose? It's a way of placing myself in a match, ordering my surroundings to match the order I seek in my head. Now, I'm not for a second saying that Rafael Nadal is on the autism spectrum. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is within sport and within elite sport, you can find any number of examples of superstitious behaviour or rituals that elite performers do. And it's that last bit there. It's a way of placing that individual in the setting, getting it in order, getting in the zone to be able to perform. Now, I think for a lot of people I work with, placing themselves in the surroundings is a very common scenario. A lot of people I work with, it takes time to get used to surroundings and get in that zone where that individual can work and act, you know, do things. So, you know, some people I work with, you know, I might be, I don't know, going to Social Security, for example. I quite regularly go down there with people, and when that person walks in, they may look around, they may go and touch a few things, and may sort of just get ready to see the people there. Others may look at that and go, what on earth are they doing? But actually, there's a real reason behind it. So the point I'm trying to make here is, if you see someone on the autism spectrum doing something which isn't sort of the norm within your group, don't challenge it unless it needs challenging. because that might be that person's way of ordering the surroundings and allowing that person to engage. So I tried to think of a way of sort of almost distilling down. Autism is a big subject. It's a very broad spectrum. You could be working with any number of individuals, any number of needs and abilities. So these are just 5 key things that I picked out that I would recommend that you just bear in mind when you're working with athletes on the autism spectrum. So first of all, you have your own coaching style, as I said at the start there, yeah. And funny enough, I was in a meeting with someone recently. We were talking about charities, and this person said that she's worked with lots of business people who are quite successful in the business field, and they come and work on a charity committee, and as she described, they forget everything because they're in a different setting, and they're worried about not doing doing something because there's an end user. There's someone with autism in our case. So don't like I said, don't deviate from your coaching style too much. Use your coaching style when you're coaching with people with autism, just like you'd use your coaching style when you're working with any athlete. Secondly, provide that context. Context is so important. Consistency is very, very important as well. And when we talk about consistency, what I'm really getting at there is the more consistent you can be as the coach with that individual on the autism spectrum, literally the easier it will be for that person to engage with you, to understand you, to be able to process the information that you're giving. So, it's a bit like if you, work in this case, might be a player. I may play out here, and there may be a player that is on my team who one week is blowing really hot, and the other week is blowing really cold. And actually, I'm trying to work out in the dressing room, are they hot this week or are they cold this week? Do I need to do anything to try and affect their performance? So it's that kind of process. It's just harder if you're up and down, and if you're not consistent in your approach. Now, obviously, a lot of this is just good coaching practice. It's nothing different to what you'll hopefully already be doing within your coaching practice. I think this prepare to be challenged, prepare to be challenged, prepare to be asked why. If you're working with someone on autism spectrum, you will get asked why. And actually, as a coach, that's a really good thing, because it makes you work harder as a coach. It makes you think through things more. It makes you, it puts you in positions where you need to give answers about why you're asking someone to do that. There may be 6 people in that session who are also thinking, why? Why do we need to do that? What's the point in doing that? I don't understand that. But the person on the autism spectrum may be the one person who says why. And that could be the best thing for you as a coach, because you'll learn, and for your teammates, because they'll get questions asked that maybe others wouldn't. And lastly, they're about building confidence. So exactly as Linda said in the start there, confidence is sadly a massive issue for a lot of people I work with. Not because of anything that individual has done wrong, but because society around them, whether that's at school, whether that's in a sports session or whatever, people will get judged. People may get called names. People may get bullied. Okay, so you may have to work with that individual to build their confidence to enable them to engage in the session.